Thixotropy. Let's talk about it. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with that word, thixotropy is a term used to describe what happens to certain substances when they are agitated in a very specific way. So, like if you've ever seen people standing on the beach and they all start to stamp their feet and then the sand starts to move like water, that is the thixotropic effect. According to Google Dictionary, if I just search up the word, the definition that comes through is the property of becoming less viscous. That is, something that's viscous is thick, like a maple syrup, versus water, which is less viscous. So the property of becoming less viscous when subjected to an applied stress, shown, for example, by some gels, which become temporarily fluid when shaken or stirred. So another common experiment that's seen on YouTube in a lot of different ways is they'll take a whole big bin of sand, put a pipe into it that's putting out air, so it's aerating that sand, and it causes it to behave as if it's water. And they'll have like a little toy boat in there, and they can slide it back and forth just as if it's in a bathtub. Really, really cool stuff. So that is the dictionary definition of thixotropy from Google. And then if we go over to this article that was submitted to me by a student, is written by Paul Ingram, and the title of this article, which is an excerpt from a much longer piece. That's a key point here. But Paul Ingram says, thixotropy is nifty, but it's not therapy. A curious property of connective tissue is often claimed as therapy. So now that we've defined what thixotropy is, in the context of massage therapy, that is what is usually touted as what's going on with the fascia. So if there's a lot of fascial binding or constriction or what have you, there's a line of study that says that therapists are having a thixotropic effect on fascia, so that if it stiffens, hardens, binds up, we apply different techniques that have a thixotropic effect on said fascia to renew its pliability and allow tissues to slide and glide alongside each other much better. So that's usually how thixotropy is used in the realm of massage therapy. But Paul Ingram here has a contradictory data point. Now I'm calling it a data point because I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Paul Ingram is full of crap and he doesn't know what he's talking about and blah, 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 because according to his credentials provided on the website about Paul Ingram, I am a science writer in Vancouver, Canada. I was a registered massage therapist for a decade and an assistant editor of sciencebasedmedicine.org for several years. I've had many injuries as a runner and ultimate player, and I've been a chronic pain patient myself since 2015. Then there's a link to a full bio, and there's links all throughout this. So essentially, this isn't just some random person on their Facebook page that's standing up and beating a war drum. You know, they're coming from the field, so we can give a lot more weight to what they have to say. So okay, now that's just a very preliminary. That's according to the website. I have no reason to doubt his background, but you know, that being said, I haven't actually verified all of that information. It is technically possible for people to make up credentials that they don't actually have, and yada yada. But we're gonna take him at his word here, and we're just gonna look at the article. Now, something else I notice about this article is there are some links. I haven't clicked a lot of them, but it doesn't have his characteristic like reference tags. So you might make a statement, and then if you're doing like an MLA formatting for a research paper, you'll include a reference for where that data point came from as you're writing, you know, as you're describing your argument and giving supporting evidence and facts. So the very first line here in this article is, I often come across the dubious notion that massage is therapeutically effective because it softens tissues, especially fascia, with thixotropic effect. A quick look at how thixotropy works in human physiology shows that this just doesn't add up. The thixotropic effect is a nifty physiology, but it's not a therapeutic effect in itself, nor is it the mechanism for one. It was never more than an idea that Ida Rolf had in the 70s about how her therapy method supposedly worked, and Ida's idea was wrong. So that's the very first paragraph in this article, but there are no references. So that statement that Ida's idea was wrong, there's no reference to that. There's no link to other studies or even to maybe a paper that she wrote or something that was detailing more about where her theory was coming from. So that, in my mind, I see that as potentially problematic. So they make several statements not backed up with any kind of reference, which, like I said, is uncommon for him. And this is an excerpt from a much larger piece. So I'm wondering if, just for the sake of making it easier to read, they removed some of those references. So, but that's one thing that I'm looking for whenever I read things like this, is where are their references coming from? They make a statement, and to me a statement is something that is presented as fact. The sky is blue. You know, that, that kind of, the undertone is what I have just said is true, and should be taken to be true. But sometimes when you peel things back and you ask more about definitions, like what do you mean by therapeutic effect? What do you mean by, let's see, dubious? Where does that come from? Anyway, so he goes on to describe what thixotropy looks like in the natural world with ketchup, and I believe he also uses the sand analogy that I was describing earlier. But essentially what it boils down to is that the thixotropic effect on any of our physiology, like even if we were able to have a thixotropic effect on fascia, it's very slow, it's very temporary, so very quickly the fascia will revert back to what it was before. He has a little bit in here about, what does he call it? Glycosaminoglycans, which is a type of, let's see, a molecule, a carbohydrate molecule is what he calls it. But also, once again, it's missing a reference. It's something I can click, but I think in links like this is usually just referring to another article that was written in this blog. But yeah, he mentions ground substance, I mean, and that supposedly the idea is that what he seems to take issue with the most, what this really boils down to, is that we are not having a thixotropic effect on the fascia, and that is not why people are benefiting. And maybe that's true. Maybe it's actually, maybe there's a different term that would be more appropriate. Because as the documentary that I linked in the fascia episode, if you actually looked at the documentary and you could see the imaging that they did of fascia, it clearly mats. If it is in a cast or lacking movement, it absolutely will affect the fascia and how densely it's matted in a certain area, potentially as a protective mechanism. And that by applying certain stresses, the matting will decrease. And so if that is not a thixotropic effect, if that is not, maybe it's not fascia, maybe there's a whole other kind of connective tissue that we haven't classified as separate, that one someday will uncover enough information to distinguish it. If you were part of the MMP community Zoom that we just had earlier today, Nick Knight was talking about all the different types of fascia we have in the body, or briefly touched on it. And he mentioned that fascia has different kinds of properties depending on where it is in the body. You know, there's a very dense fascial membrane that's encasing the heart and creating like a pocket for the lungs and for the abdominal cavity and things like that. So, but that kind of fascia is slightly different from the fascia that's wrapping around individual muscle fibers and muscle groups and and those sorts of things. So similarly to how tendons and ligaments are kind of made up of the same components, but they're just laid down in a different way. An analogy that I frequently use is a lace doily, that the human body is all one connected stitch, but it's woven more densely and compactly in some areas than in others. So that's how we that's why, ligaments, let's say, are ligaments, and how they're different to how tendons function and operate. So, um, so to kind of bring it all to a close, what I sense that Paul is truly challenging here is that there is no therapeutic benefit in thixotropy itself. That even if we are creating a thixotropic effect in the fascia or other connective tissues, it's temporary, it's subtle. But then, okay, if it's temporary and subtle for that time, what if we are having a temporary thixotropic effect and it's allowing better lymph movement temporarily? It's allowing other kinds of molecular processes and chemical processes that were before somewhat hindered to resume normal function and flow. Kind of like if you've got gutters around a house and there's a leaf or a stick, a small thing that catches somewhere on the edge, and then another leaf catches on that, and then you get another couple more leaves, and before you know it, you've just got a little trickle going through the gutter when there's kind of a stagnated pool of water in the gutter that's impeded by that that filter that's getting more and more dense. So that's kind of the thing I think of. I mean, there was a point in time where people were burned at the stake because they said the earth was round, or they said that the sun was the center of all the planets and that we were in fact revolving around the sun, not vice versa. I mean, doctors used to balk at just the idea that there were microorganisms as a modus of infection, why it was important to sanitize between opening a cadaver and then going to perform surgery on a living human being, that it was important to sanitize. I mean, that wasn't always known. So whenever I see conflicting data points like this, I firmly resist the urge to take it personally and be like, oh, how dare you, you don't know what I've seen about fascia, how can you possibly say that da 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 da. We don't know. The truth is, we don't know. And I believe it's important not to vilify any one data point as being totally bunk and totally out there. I believe that there's lessons to be learned, even if something is totally bunked and said, okay, yep, that absolutely did not work the way that we thought it did. We still consider all of these elements as part of a bigger picture, so that we can maybe ask a different question, So that's kind of where I come to with this. The student that approached me with this article was feeling really, I don't want to use the word threatened, but your world can just feel shaken up when you're told something that you'd never heard before, or if you've had it wrong for so many years and you've been telling so many people, and so it's that sunk cost fallacy of oh no, what if I've been having it wrong? And that's okay, so what? That you just acknowledge what you might have been misinformed on or might have misunderstood or whatever, and you change your opinion, and maybe you re-educate a few people as needed, or you explain okay, you know what, remember how I was always talking about this? Well, I've recently come across an article that says this, and so now I'm doing more research. And I think that's perfectly valid, because we're not, at no point in time in human history, in my opinion, are we ever going to be able to stand up and say, okay, we got it. We found out all the answers. We know how everything works. We're not going to need to do any more research. We've determined that, all of these facts. And so, the more deeply we dive, the more questions we find, in my opinion. So, I'm kind of curious where a lot of this information that Paul is presenting is coming from. Like I said, it's missing references, which is not his usual style. However, I don't dismiss the idea that, okay, maybe the thixotropic effect is a coincidence and it's not truly, that's not the therapeutic part that's taking place. It just happens to be going on as we're doing other therapeutic things. But, okay, so maybe we come up with a different word for it. Maybe we do more research and discover that the temporary thixotropic effect had a therapeutic benefit in some other way as like a secondary type of benefit. And, that's okay because there's still so much that we don't know. So if you have any opinions on this matter, or if you've read other articles, other conflicting data points about thixotropy and fascial work and that sort of thing, I'd love to see it posted. Give a link in the comments to this episode, because I want to know the truth, don't you? So this is one of many data points, and I hope to gather many more and get a clearer picture of the truth. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it brings some clarity, or maybe it raises more questions, or maybe it's even provided some answers. So I would love to hear your opinions on this one way or the other. If you strongly agree with Paul, if you strongly disagree with Paul. But of course, be respectful, be loving. It's all opinion. We all have a slightly different understanding of the world that we live in. And while I believe that no one's experience is completely invalid, I also don't believe that any one person has exactly the right answer on, a lot of things. You know what I mean? So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you're still a free community member, if you're a massage therapist and you're looking for new techniques to use in the therapy room, if you're looking for monthly MMP Zoom meetings where we have expert guest speakers from, craniosacral, cupping, PT, pelvic floor, like all kinds of really cool stuff. If you like the kind of sciencey stuff for massage therapists, there's even more when you join the subscriber plan. So you can always take a look at that. And if you're if you're someone who's just really curious about the body and the science and what it is that massage therapy is doing for you, then this series will continue as such, just reviewing different data points we find along the way and hoping to elevate the game. So share this with friends and family and anyone you think might be interested in this sort of stuff. And I hope you have a wonderful day.